Welcome to Three Films and a Podcast, the show where Destiny brought together three friends to enhance each other's cinematic journey by watching three new movies in a series of themed rounds. There is no claim of ownership on any film footage used in this episode, as all film footage is owned in its entirety by the copyright holders. And just like every car in Too Fast, Too Furious, this podcast contains spoilers. Enjoy!
All right, going to start us off with our visualization exercise. I invite all listeners, whether you're watching on YouTube or just listening in your car, to take a moment and close your eyes and imagine what I'm about to. I'm going to orate something, and I just want you to put yourself there and imagine that this is you. You're hiking down into a 16th century peasant town in the farming hills of South France. You approach some townsfolk warmly, and they study you for a moment, then ask who you are. When you jokingly say, "You don't recognize me?" they respond with a bewildered guess. "Martin?" You roll with it. Martin. You like the sound of it. You go into town and you meet Martin's sisters, uncle, and child. It isn't until you meet Martin's babe for a wife that you decide, you know what? Maybe I am Martin. If this sounds like you, then you might be the main character in the 1982 movie, The Return of Martin Guerre, which is what we'll be covering tonight. Welcome back to Three Films and a Podcast. We are three folks challenging each other and all of you to watch movies you've never seen before. You can find us anywhere you can find pods, on social media at 3filmspod. We recommend you watch our YouTube show because of the production that Ben puts into it. Tonight, Ben is absent, but I am joined here always by Tyler Beck.
Are we sure it's me?
I'm guessing. I haven't
Maybe
confirmed.
It's a better Tyler Beck.
Yeah.
Maybe this is an improvement over the past Tyler Beck.
Better friend.
That wouldn't be hard.
Yeah. More present. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a real curmudgeonly son of a bitch, so
there you go.
Whoever's here in my stead is an improvement for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Today we're excited to have a returning guest, and if any of you have followed along, also one of my longtime nemesis, Tom Layman.
Hello, how you doing?
Welcome back.
Thank you, Matt. I'm glad to be back. Even somewhat happy to be looking at your face. I'm glad to bring the sexy back to
there we go.
To Three Films in the Pod.
Yeah,
exactly.
We really
needed it.
Yeah, it needed it, Matt. You've been letting the podcast down. You haven't been hitting the gym.
Don't have the mojo.
Yeah, just stop doing the coke. Just get back on the ball. Let's make this hot again.
The best part about that joke is Matt is the biggest prude of this entire podcast.
That's absolutely accurate. Tom,
self-admitted.
Remind everyone where they can find you and where you come from.
Oh Lord, where can you find me? So I'm from I forgot. I don't know. I don't remember where I came from. Talking Pictures Trivia is our podcast where we met. Or it's the podcast I do with a few friends where I've had you guys on. We also have under Talking Pictures Studios our company. We have Talking Pictures Trivia, which is our main film podcast where we put out a podcast on movies every week or so, and we've had like 160 or so episodes at this point. We also have another show, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games on podcast and on YouTube. So we're releasing our first season where we're playing through 1982's The Hobbit. So it's a text-based adventure game of The Hobbit.
Awesome.
It's a lot of fun. It was very frustrating to try and figure out how to play a text-based adventure game, especially for me who has about zero interest in gaming. And we also have another show, Get the Point, where we pointilize movie posters and try and guess what movie poster it is. So we have those three shows all going now at Talking Pictures Studios. So come on by.
I'm excited for that Hobbit. For the Hobbit episode because I've still yet to finish the Hobbit movies, and I think I'm gonna not do that. I'm just gonna watch your show instead because I didn't enjoy the first Hobbit as much as I would have hoped.
I haven't watched the Hobbit movies, but I like the books or whatever. The text-based adventure game is a lot of it is like how do we tell Thorin to do this thing? Do we say Thorin, give Thorin? Where do we put, there's a lot of like working through the mechanics of this older video game form, which is surprisingly entertaining, despite baffling for me. But there you go.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Well, this episode is it's the third film. We're covering the third film in the round of our French films, which is exactly as described, movies in French, made by French folks and released in France. So for this, I nominated The Return of Martin Guerre. It had been on my watch list for a very long time. And then on Letterboxd, my dad had seen it on my Letterboxd, and he's like, oh, that sounds interesting. And then he checked it out like a year ago. And then he like forgot that he saw it on my watch list. Steve. Yeah. Shout out, Steve. Hey, Dad.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
I hope to meet you one day.
Yeah. Steve, this is Tom.
How you doing?
Yeah. He had seen it on my list, and he watched it, and then he recommended it to me, I think forgetting that he had seen it on my watch list, which is great.
That's incredible.
Yeah. No
classic
complaints
Steve
there.
Move.
Yeah. Classic Steve. The movie stars Gerard Depardieu, which is my worst attempt at a French pronunciation of a name.
No, that was pretty good.
Yeah, I think you said it correctly.
If I just make enough of those noises, it sounds French.
Yeah.
Our American audience would recognize him better as the Musketeer Porthos from The Man in the Iron Mask. And if you check out his Wikipedia page, he's not a role model. He's been involved in some pretty rough allegations. But you probably haven't recognized him anywhere else, so it probably doesn't matter. But to roll into the movie, I would love to hear, Tom, what was your experience with this movie, your first overall thoughts, and how did you come across this movie?
Well, I came across this movie when we were doing our Matrix block in correspondence with the Matrix Part 4, that masterpiece. And we had put together a few movies that were kind of on theme. And I thought this would be an interesting movie that was on theme that wasn't science fiction. That's what I was looking for, something that I could talk about in relationship to the Matrix that wasn't science fiction. And it was this kind of different ideas of what is true or what is reality, right? Which is something the Matrix brings up, and I think this movie does as well, but in a different and maybe even in an opposite way. My experience with the movie is pretty positive. I've watched it a few times at this point. I've read a lot of the account, the book that this was based on, that Jean de Corre had written back in the 1560s and republished 5 or 6 times. And it's just this fascinating little curio. There isn't a lot to it, right? It's a pretty simple story. It's pretty straightforward. It's very weird, but not too weird. And I'm not entirely sure what the grand conclusion is that comes out of it, but it's just it's just this kind of funny, odd story. And the movie, it looks good, but there isn't a lot to the movie either, except for, I think, Gerard Depardieu's performance, which I think is pretty marvelous and incredibly charismatic. Right. This man is sort of in love with his scheme, but also, I think, genuinely in love with the town that he's occupied in this new guise as Martin. And watching him kind of in love with his performance, but also in love with these people and actually genuinely contributing to the town in the way that original Martin or No Good Martin failed to do, is pretty entertaining. And him and the female lead he plays against are quite wonderful. And it makes this odd little movie, I think, a delight.
Yeah. When you said that you're not quite sure like what you're supposed to get from this movie, like I couldn't possibly agree more. I just watched it. I literally finished watching it, and we were late to start recording because I was squeezing in at the last minute. And when it ended, I was like, I am not entirely sure how I'm supposed to talk about this movie. Because, like, there was no real mystery to it. It was kind of fun to think about, like, oh, is this really him? Is it really not? I sort of had a sense that it wasn't the real Martin, but Martin. But But to say all that, I really did enjoy it, and I'm actually like, I'm surprised at how much I want to watch it again and see what I pick up on with fresh eyes. And I also didn't realize that it was a story that had been around for that long. So I'm actually more interested in sort of the lore behind it and some of the other ways the story might have been told or different versions of it. And I was kind of curious. I don't often do this, but I was kind of wondering, I was like, I wonder which movies are a remake of this story, because I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I'm sure they're out there and I want to watch those too.
Yeah, there are. There was one made in the American South, or made, excuse me, not in the American South, about the American South after the Civil War, starring Richard Gere, which did the same thing. There was another movie overseas. I'm forgetting the name now. Did they call it The Return
of Richard Gere?
That's
so close.
They didn't. It's pretty close. Yeah, no, they should have called it that.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah, it was called like Sunnitide or Sunnybrook, something like that.
It's Somersby, right?
Somersby. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
And they had another foreign language version. There was a musical version of this tried in the West End at one point. So it's been digested and spit back out in a number of ways. And this itself is based upon a book called The Wife of Martin Guerre, which was told from Bertrand's, his wife's perspective. And so even in this kind of, even in the novelization, there's variation on this story. It seems like it has fascinated people for centuries at this point.
And it's so interesting because there's so many different points of view in this story. So like to hear that there's other versions of it from her point of view, I could see there being a version of it from Martin's actual point of view and so on and so forth. Like you're right. It is a simple story and there's a lot going on, but there's really not. I mean, it's pretty simple to follow along, and I don't know. I think it's just it's a compelling idea, and it's just kind of fun to watch the threads unravel. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
So I don't know.
I think what makes it fun and relatable is it's kind of an elaborate would you rather question. It's like, would you rather have a deadbeat husband who the town hates, who doesn't contribute, or a total stranger come in, pretend to be your husband, father your children. And I think that aspect of it seems kind of fun. And also just like throwing in the town dynamics and like, well, if this guy comes in, he could technically do this and could technically do that. And all those things start to unravel. And I think that's what kind of makes it, fun to experience. I was watching this and I was reminded immediately. And of course, this episode was based off of it. The Simpsons episode, The Principal and the Pauper, where
interesting.
It essentially, for those who haven't seen it, the real Principal Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner comes back to Springfield and exposes Principal Skinner as not the real Seymour Skinner.
Oh yes. Oh yes. I forgot about this entirely. Keep going. And
anyway, it comes out that similar to this story, they had met at war. The real Seymour Skinner had told him everything about his life, told him he had no intention of ever coming home, or maybe he was separated. I can't remember exactly what it was. And like Seymour Skinner's like, oh, I'm gonna go live this guy's life. And anyway, so I'm watching this movie. I'm like, oh, this is where that episode came from. So that's where my mind came from. The Simpsons.
That happened to Don Draper, right? In Mad Men. Isn't that part of the plot of that television show?
Oh yeah. That's true.
Spoiler alert.
Oh, sorry. For the audience, I have seen 2 episodes of Mad Men and I couldn't stand it. So I have no problem spoiling that show.
Yeah, honestly, that's kind of where I'm at, Tom.
Yeah.
I tried. I was like, I don't know. People like it. I'm not into it.
I'm not into it at all. I found it terribly condescending. But I know I love that kind of conception of would you rather, that idea of would you rather, because it is for me why I had put it with The Matrix. I guess we could talk about it with our Adam Driver drive-in. But it's these kind of different ideas of what is truth, right? You have a correspondence theory, right? Is like truth what you see in the world, right? It's not Martin because it's not Martin. Sorry, there's a guy named Martin and this dude ain't him. Or is it like truth what works? Right? What is true is what works, what has utility, what we can process. And if you read things by like the astrophysicist Donald Hoffman, who says that basically what we perceive in the world isn't true at all. When you look at the physics of it, how we digest the world has nothing to do with actually the reality. What we're doing is understanding the world in a way that we can use it and survive in it. And that seems to be what's going on here. New Martin, better Martin, is a better Martin, right? He works in that community better than the old Martin. And so is he Martin? Well, in a correspondence way, no, he's not. But in a utility way, yeah, he's better than what we need. Yeah. He's what we need. Yeah. He's the better version of Martin. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, this is the obvious question the movie poses, but I did want to talk about it is like, is he really the bad guy? You know, like he's the one who takes the fall in the end. And the ending visuals here are quite striking. I really loved how just the look of how this movie ended with the flames and the hanging. Like, I don't like to see humans being burned, from a noose, but it was a pretty striking end to the movie. And I just couldn't help but thinking like, I don't know that he really deserved to die for this. Like what he did was under false pretenses for sure, but it seems to me that it was revealed that I forget how to say her name at the moment, but his wife was, and she was in on it and she was okay with it because her life was markedly improved by his appearance, right? Or his reappearance, I guess, as the movie presents it as we watch along. But so I mean, like, as from like a morality standpoint, like he's certainly guilty, but it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm not entirely sure. And that's his argument in court, you know?
Yeah, that's one of the curious things about this telling of it, which is after he dies, we get in that voiceover where it talks about the next person whose substantialness is going to die is Jean, the jurist who seemed somewhat kindly disposed to everyone, who goes through his own sort of crisis of belief, becomes a Protestant, and ends up being killed. This is a real person, by the way. This was, all these people are real, but Jean de Croix, I think is how we say his name, had a very substantial writing career. He was a very influential jurist. Had a big effect on Jean Bodin, a later French jurist and a contributor to legal theory. So this guy was very important, but he ends up getting killed right after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre for converting to Protestantism. And it's a very odd note. Yeah, but it's, there's certain things in doing my research on this. It's a very odd note to end the movie on that, right? That there's this kind of religious persecution that we know is going to happen that kills him. What's also interesting is that there was this sort of Calvinist effect going on in the village at that time. It's not really in the film, but if you kind of do the research in this village, that was going on. And had there been this kind of Protestant influence or permission, abandonment was grounds for divorce. And if you got abandoned, you could divorce your husband and marry somebody else, right? So this becomes something that wouldn't have been illegal. This wouldn't have been adultery, which is really what the violation of the marriage vows is why Ponchette and fake Martin ends up getting hanged. And so there is this sort of like this really odd note of like this hanging or this death is somehow anti-human. It might be legally correct. It might follow the letter of the law, but we see in the greater sway of history, it's part of this. It's a smaller thing in a greater anti-humanistic force that's going on. And that's kind of my reading of that ending. Because at the beginning of this movie, we learn that we're in the era of Francois I, who was this kind of great humanistic French king. He's the guy who brought Da Vinci to France. It's why the Mona Lisa is in France, because he brought Da Vinci here. He was a person deeply invested in artwork and what have you. And it ends in the kind of killing of these massacre of these Protestants, really. That's how the voiceover ends. And so I'm wondering if that's the arc here is into this kind of legalistic kind of anti-human thing. Or maybe that's an overread. That could be possibly an overread. But what confused me in my first watch was that voiceover at the end. Like, why do we end with the death of Jean? Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's as good of a, I mean, that context helps me digest the movie for sure. Like I said, I'm still kind of processing it. So to hear all of that sort of context to it actually really helps me digest it. And I agree with your read on it. I think that's exactly what it's trying to say, because it's like, I guess the whole time I was watching the movie, I wasn't quite sure whose story we were watching, right? Like, is this her story? Is this his story? Is this the village's story? Is this like our story is it my story as a person, like thinking about my morality? You know what I mean? So that's a lot of great context that actually is helping me process it. And I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's also interesting that he ultimately is killed in the end, when through the transcourse of the whole story, it shows that there was some manipulation on both sides to, even though he wasn't Martin, the people who were accusing him of not being Martin were still pulling strings and doing illegal things to try to pin him down. And they get, a slap on the wrist because ultimately, it's a bigger deal that he didn't turn out being Martin. I also got a sense as I was watching this, like, just with like modern day conspiracies, it was funny to watch this. Like, I'm watching this and I'm looking at the court and I'm hearing just the arguments and how preposterous they are. Like, look, like he's basically asking like loaded questions, trying to get specific answers. Like, see, it is me. And like, you think like, how could that possibly hold up? But then today you see some of the conspiracies that people are believing and buying into. Like, I'm reminded of last NFL season, that NFL player in Buffalo who had the heart attack on field and like died. And like the very next game, you had conspiracy theorists online saying like, that's a body double that's attending the next game. Like, that's not really him. It's like, wait a second. How could you possibly believe that? He can get on TV right now and tell you that it's him. So it's funny how that type of thing still carries over in the modern age. Mm-hmm. Tom, you were going to say something?
Sure. I was going to say, I agree with you, because I think it's part of Publix. It's this idea of a public, right? A public, if we think there's a scholar whose name I just forgot because we're recording a podcast, and that's how brains work. Yep. That's how it works. Yeah. But he ends up describing a public as people who share a discourse, right? They share a conversation. They're reading the same things. They're listening to the same things. And this is how these conspiracy theories work, right? Which is why they gestate online so well, because people from different areas can read the same stuff. And in this movie, like almost all of the shots in this movie are of the community. Like, these people are never alone. They don't even fuck alone, right? There's somebody right outside the door who's like kissing you before you go to bed with your husband, right? There's no sense of privacy. Everything is made together. And you get the sense that people are made in this community, right? They're not individuals. They're part of this town. And so it seems like, in the way that you're saying conspiracy theories work, where a bunch of us get together and we become a quote unquote town or a public around this idea that this NFL player is actually alive, or that's a body double or something. These people get together and they get this idea that this guy who doesn't really look like Martin is actually Martin, because it helps our public. It helps our community. Right. It works, and it works for these conspiracy theorists. This gives you purpose in your silly little life. Right. And for them, it's even more practical. Martin's actually good at farm work. The old guys suck. Apparently he's good in bed. It's
like, come on, guys, just be happy with Martin. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But I think that's like, there's not a lot to be said about the direction of this movie, what the director was doing. It doesn't seem to be particularly distinct, but you never see people alone. They're always in these these groups. And I think that ends up being a big part of this idea, is that it is a movie about publics.
That is interesting, because he's functional to their he's functional in their narrative up until he challenges it, when he's asking for the fortune, and then all of a sudden he doesn't fit. That's when the House of Cards comes tumbling down.
He's no longer a utility. Now he's a drain. Now he's a liability, you know?
Yeah.
He's a threat.
Yeah, at least for Pierre. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess before we move on to the next section, if you're listening to this and you saw Barry Lyndon and The Last Duel, this movie is your jam. Check it out, because this is in that genre of European commentary.
See this movie before Barry Lyndon. I would say this movie's better.
Yeah.
It's also one third the length. Yeah.
Before you sit through it, and also Fake Martin is easier to cheer for than Barry is. So
for sure.
So we'll move into the elevator. We don't have a lot of time. We're almost to the floor that we need to get to, but we have people in the elevator that have not seen this movie. So I want to know, Tom, you're pulling out your phone. You're showing them a scene to get them to watch this. What scene are you showing them?
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
It's my phone here. Well, I still have an iPhone 6, so I don't know if the YouTube is working on it. So I'll just describe it to them. Yeah, I'm terrible with technology. I like everything this computer's from 2016, for example. So
you realize there's a developer at Apple that's like, there's one fucking guy in New England that has I have to support this one guy with his iPhone 6. Yeah.
This one cunt. We still need to make batteries for his phone. So I think the scene that I would sell is when Martin comes back and he's describing to these different people in the room what it was like to travel abroad. And he's describing Spain to them, and he's kind of laughing with them. And it ends with him going to get the candles, and he doesn't know where the candles are. And and it's a very small give. We as audience members know why it's there, but it's a very small give that he doesn't exactly know what he's doing. But at the same time, he is so charming, and you watch him charm these different women with his flirtations, with his seeing everybody again, quote unquote, again, for being able to tell these tales about his adventures in the French-Italian wars and what have you. And you get all of that charm while recognizing the deceit, I think, all in that sequence. And you also recognize the reason to watch this movie really is Gerard Depardieu. His performance is quite lovely. And
it's such a confident deceit, right? Like, you just act like you know what you're doing. I mean, that's I've heard that, just fake it till you make it, right? Like, he's like, I'm just going to get up and start looking for the candles, and I'll just pretend I don't remember. It's been 9 years. And that's a plausible excuse. He remembers enough detail, like important detail about people and family and friends, that where the candles are kept seems understandable, right? Like, it's a great, even as someone who kind of, like I said, I kind of knew it wasn't him. I was still kind of like, well, I don't know, man. Like, it's been a while.
Again, they probably didn't buy it, but they're still like, you know what? This guy is like way better than Martin. Like, let's keep him around. They weren't in a hurry to expose him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's so charming. He's so charming.
He is. And I'm a sucker for those scenes. And it's always in movies that are set in like a time period like this. Just the gluttony, just the greasy fingers, and just the beer falling down their chins, and they drink, like, throwing their goblets around when they cheers. They just waste an entire beer for every cheers. And I don't know. I always love that. It's like, it always gets me.
Yeah, it was a great scene.
His Panchette, his nickname, means appetite. That's what that translates to, because he was he's like, and then that makes sense for him, right? Because new Martin is appetite. He's just bigger than everything. He's bigger than life. He kind of consumes all of the air, and people love him for it.
Yeah. Tyler, what was your scene?
I really liked all of the scenes. So there's some pretty cool score in this movie with like the chanting and like the grunting and the sort of like tribalistic music, So I liked all of those scenes. They seemed to like, there was a level of, they were just ominous. Those scenes were always ominous with that music kind of like pulsating. And it kind of had an uneasy feeling. And I think my favorite version of that is when the two of them are kind of wandering out to the field, and they see the smoke, and she's afraid of the spirits, and we get a cool shot of like that ring of smoke in the fog. And then, you know, the guys jump out of the bushes or whatever. I really like that scene because it was sort of like, that was the most magic this movie felt. You know what I mean? That was like the hint of some level of like spiritualism or an otherworldly power or whatever. And I thought it looked really cool. And I thought it was kind of fun. And it's kind of a dirty trick because it might trick someone into thinking it's going to be like a ghost type of movie, which it really isn't. But I think it would entice someone to see the movie. And I just thought it was some of my favorite camera work in the movie, some of my favorite cinematography in the movie. And so that would be the standout for me. But just any of those scenes with that score, I just loved it.
Yeah, it's a fairy tale movie, and that scene does give you that fairy tale feel. Absolutely,
for sure.
Yeah, totally. So I'm a fool for any of these like pagan tradition scenes that we see in movies where people are dressed up in leaves and trees, and there's a bear. Yeah, honestly, you put a guy in a bear suit, that scene is going to be my favorite scene 10 out of 10 times.
I clocked this instantly.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I'm gonna start.
It's a very strange fetish you have, Matt.
I'm gonna start putting my guess for Matt's elevator pitch like in a sealed envelope before I start recording, so I can open it up and show you that I was right every time.
That'd be great. That would enrich the segment for sure. But yeah, honestly,
I'm gonna start doing it.
I've already done the work for you on this one. If there's a guy in a bear suit, it's going to be my favorite scene.
Yeah.
But I also loved the scene that you brought up. I mean, those vagabonds had put on some of those costumes again and just got, you know, the living snot kicked out of them by New Martin. It was funny. It's like as if he needed to prove to his wife more that he wasn't the old Martin, like taking on two dudes at once. Yeah. It's like old Martin was such a wiener. Like there's no way. She knew all along. But yeah, that would be my scene. They'd probably look at that and they'd be like, what the freak is this movie? But honestly, you could say that about any movie with a guy in a bear costume. You have no idea. You have no idea what that movie's about.
Especially when there's a giant fake penis involved.
Yeah. We need to have a Mount Rushmore of guys in bear costumes, and or a Mount Rushmore of fake penises.
I mean, yeah. Let's keep it family friendly. Let's just go bear costume. When we have we'll come out with our After Dark podcast. We can talk about the
phallic.
But I already have my fake. I have my fake bear entry all ready to go.
These are OR scrubs. Oh, are they?
You guys covered it on your show, Talking Trivia. Super Troopers, the bear fucker scene.
Oh, yeah. There we go. Yeah.
Okay. Are we organically moving into this as the Rushmore here?
Well, we'll do two Rushmores. We'll do an impromptu, and then we'll do. Well, I mean, it's up to you. You're the host.
I mean, we can. Tom, do you have one out of pocket?
I mean, the most famous. So this is super pretentious, but it's me. So, you know, but the most famous bear costume scene I can think of is Winter's Tale, where like at the end of Act 2, like the main character leaves and it's exit pursued by a bear, and just like a guy in a bear costume comes out and like kills him. And that's it. And it's just this like random, it's this amazing thing in Shakespeare where it's like you're reading the Shakespeare, and if you miss this stage direction, which typically are the most important things in the world in Shakespeare, you're like, wait, it's a bear? There's a guy in a bear costume? What is this doing here? You know, it's the weirdest thing. But I think like that may be, I'm going to cheat and say a play and just say Exit Pursued by Bear and Winter's Tale is my bear. Guy in a bear costume.
Well, there's got to be an adaptation of that Shakespeare somewhere. I'm
sure.
I don't know.
On a film. Yeah, it is. I'm sure it's on the silver screen somewhere. Yeah, it counts.
We can count it.
So mine would have to be, we actually covered this movie earlier this season, The Wicker Man. Nick Cage.
Oh,
I've not seen it.
The Nick Cage Wicker Man.
Oh, Tom,
it's an all-timer man in bear costume. You don't even have to watch the movie. Just look up YouTube. Watch the compilation. It's the movie's probably not worth your time.
It probably isn't. But I'll take your word for it.
It's worth your time. It's worth your time for a laugh, you know, if you're hanging out, if you're around some buddies and having some beers. It's worth that at least.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking of what's another movie with a bear? The more recent movie, it's like a horror movie by the guy who made Heredity.
Oh yeah, Midsommar.
Midsommar has a guy in a bear costume, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
We did it. We filled out a full Rushmore.
Yeah.
Okay. There's our Rushmore for today.
Yeah, we got two of them. Yeah.
Is that the first organic Rushmore in history of this podcast?
It absolutely is. It absolutely
I'm
making
so
history.
glad Tom was here for that.
And I'm glad I was able to help. I was a chisel that South Dakotan mountain into something worthy of this country.
Finally. Bear
Finally,
costume.
exactly.
It's about
Bear
time.
costume and dicks. That's what we need on that Rushmore.
All right. So we're leaving Mount Rushmore. We're trying to hit something. We're still kind of in the mood for a movie. We want to hit something on the way back. And Adam Driver, we put it into Google Maps. Adam Driver's Drive-In is right around the corner. The only caveat is he requires us to come up with the lineup or the bill that they're showing that night. So we need to pair The Return of Martin Guerre with another movie. And so, Tom, I'm interested, if you're showing this at the drive-in theater, what are you showing with this movie and which are you showing first?
I just had sex. I'm about to eat nachos. It's the greatest moment of my life.
So I'm going to cheat and do what our podcast did, which was pair it with The Matrix. And I sort of touched on this earlier on in the podcast, but my reason for that is, and I would put The Matrix first, by the way, my reason for that pairing is that The Matrix proposes there's a real world and you're free when you can see reality for what it is, right? That's the whole point of The Matrix. The Matrix might actually be a better world. The inside the Matrix might be a better world than being outside of the Matrix, just in terms of having resources, right? You have a lot more. You could have a steak dinner in the Matrix. You don't seem to be able to have that.
I've always argued I would be Cypher. Give me that steak. I don't want to have to like betray the people I love to get it, but like just leave me in, man. Plug me in.
You would.
I'm good.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to, but I would. So that's and just for a steak, not even get plugged back in. But
steak.
But I think that's what that movie proposes, right? Freedom comes from seeing the truth, right? And that's a fairly common way of looking at the world. And I think this movie sort of says freedom comes when you have the agency to make your truth. And it's not just you, it's maybe your community, but that's where freedom and happiness comes from, when you can kind of organically make it, right? You're not condemned to it by conditions. You know, when you could almost say like, yeah, we'll be in the Matrix, but by being in the Matrix, we're going to have the power to shape that reality. And I think that's why I would pair these together. I think they bring up, in contrast to one another, deep questions about what does it mean to have truth and how does that connect to our freedom?
For sure. And I think you mentioned this earlier, but they both talk about truth being what you want it to be, right? For Cypher, he wants his truth to be the Matrix with the steak. And for the rest of the people on the Nebuchadnezzar, they want it to be what's real, what is actually the truth or the reality outside of the Matrix. And here, everyone wants this to be Martin so badly, and like you've talked about, it's mainly just because it's a pretty good Martin, man. That's an upgrade. This is a better Martin, and it's a better life, and it's a better truth for everyone. So that's a great connection. And I've always wanted to hear you explain how you connected these movies, and so I'm glad to have finally heard it. I had a different movie in mind, but as we were talking, I looked up a list, and I'm pairing this with School of Rock. Both movies about people stealing an identity.
Love it.
Fortunately, Jack Black doesn't get burned at the end of a noose at the end of this, which would have been a huge tragedy. I love Jack Black with all my heart. He's a national treasure. Jack, if you're listening, please like and subscribe. And I just freaking love School of Rock. So we're going to go Martin Guerre first, and we're going to end the night on a bang. School of Rock, one of my all-time faves. And they're actually they're pretty similar stories the more I thought about it. So I feel pretty good about that pairing.
That's a cool pairing. Yeah. So, I mean, I mentioned that my mind went to The Simpsons when I saw this, and it also went to another comedy, and I would queue up The Addams Family with that story arc with Uncle Fester, where they don't know if it's really him.
Right.
They conclude that it's not him, and then they find out in the end that it is in fact him, which is hilarious. So I'm pairing into Addams Family, but Tyler, you just when you brought up School of Rock, it also reminded me of Big Daddy, where there's a similar dynamic there with him pretending to be the kid's dad, and then it goes to court and all that. So that would be an interesting pairing too. But yeah, I'm going the Return of Martin Guerre first, and then I'll lighten it up so people can appreciate the humor with Addams Family.
Yeah,
afterwards.
Good call.
Pretty good.
There's a lot of really good mistaken identity movies. Longtime listeners of the pod and friends of mine would be surprised I didn't pick The Big Lebowski, which is my all-time favorite movie about a mistaken identity. But I think School of Rock has more in common. And the movie I was originally going to suggest, well, there was two. There was one, The Fugitive for one, and then the other one being Shutter Island. And that's more so like he doesn't realize his identity as much as he's stealing it, but still a mistaken identity thing. But it's a pretty good way to build a story. It's a fun way to tell a story for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and since we're not doing the mistaken identity Rushmore anymore, we can just kind of go through and talk about some of these movies that are similar in that way. I was going to for the Rushmore of mistaken identity, I was going to choose The Man Who Knew Too Little. For some reason, my mind was just in comedies tonight for whatever reason. That's a hilarious sort of spoof on North by Northwest, where he's immediately mistaken to someone he's not, but he thinks it's a joke the whole time. So he's kind of playing it as a joke as an actor. Very funny. But did you guys have any other movies that you wanted to tie in there?
Well, I had North by Northwest was one of them.
Yeah.
I also put The Third Man, just because The Third Man, that it's actually not Orson Welles, it's Carol, I forgot, because we're recording, I forgot his name. But Orson Welles is in the movie, and it's a mistaken identity. They think this guy has been killed, and they mistake the body for someone else, and it turns out that Harry Lime, who they think has been killed, is actually alive and continuing his kind of criminal underground devious behavior. And the moment when you realize that he's still alive is one of the great moments in cinema history. This kind of light, it's this great lighting moment where the light comes on, like a street light comes on, and you see Harry Lime, who's supposed to be dead, and it's Orson Welles, and of course, and he gives him like a little wink, and then the light goes off and he vanishes, and it's like this amazing moment when you see that the mistaken identity falls apart. And so I was thinking of that movie especially.
Oh dang, I gotta check that out.
Watch list immediately.
Yeah. One of the great noirs. Also, another great performance from Joseph Cotten, who we all know from Citizen Kane and what have you. Great movie. Third Man, great movie. Also, on Talking Pictures Trivia, we have an episode dedicated to The Third Man. So,
well, I'm going to watch it, and I'm going to listen to that episode. See if I can answer the trivia. I always like when every time I can listen to an episode of yours and I know the answer, I'm like, come on, I know this one, damn it. But then if I'm on your show, I can't remember the actual answers. So
yeah, I know. It's always, the record button has a lovely way of messing with your memory.
Yeah.
Tyler, do you have any you want to add there?
No, nothing other than the ones I already talked about. Obviously, Big Lebowski is my all-time favorite movie. And,
cool.
Sort of on the other side of the coin of the mistaken identity, but still fits.
Yeah.
And David Lynch does that a lot too, right? Lost Highways and Mulholland Drive are both about mistaken or swapping identities, right? Where when you mistake your identity, sometimes it actually changes into the identity you've been mistaken for, or something along those lines. And both of those movies do that if you've seen them.
Actually, I thought I had, but I was like, no, I actually don't think I have.
Yeah. Mulholland Drive is the better movie. And also like the mistaken identity involves like incredibly attractive lesbians, so that makes it all the more better. Played by Naomi Watts and Laura Herring. But there is this kind of like change of identity or mistaken identity that goes on in there. And Lost Highways does the same thing with a Bill Pullman character.
Okay.
You know, but they're phenomenal movies, especially Mulholland Drive.
Awesome.
Yeah. Gosh,
yeah.
My memory's terrible. I'm sitting here thinking like I've seen Mulholland Drive, and I'm like, wait, no, I haven't. As you're describing, I'm like, no, I've never seen that.
Yeah, I need to check some of these. I'm realizing that I quite enjoy mistaken identity movies, as it turns out.
Yeah,
I'm realizing on air right now.
Same. In the moment, I'm like, oh, this is like my favorite genre.
Yeah.
Dead Ringer, right? Brian De Palma. That's another one. Dead Ringer.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guess I've got.
That's what this podcast's all about. Exploration.
Add them to the list. Is there anything on this movie that we want to touch on that we haven't yet?
Not for me. I mean, I've touched on a lot. You've heard my lips flap quite a bit. I love Gerard Depardieu in this, and I think whatever intellectual activity we want to do talking about this movie is one thing, but he's so charismatic. And he's just so kind of like sweet and lovable in this world. Right. And the fact that he actually doesn't really seem to want to take advantage. He wants the inheritance from Martin, but he doesn't seem to want to take advantage of people. Other than that, he's a good husband. Yeah. He's a good worker.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and we can only assume that he wanted that inheritance so that he could provide a good life for his wife and his family, not to like cut and run.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like he's going anywhere.
Dude, why'd you get greedy? You made it. You knocked it out of the park, man. You got the beautiful family. Everyone loves you. You basically own this town. Just wait it out. You're gonna get that money. Like, why'd you have to ask for it now? You got greedy. Don't get greedy, kids. That's what this movie taught me.
Don't get greedy.
One thing. Sorry, I'll let you go.
No, I was done.
Oh, I was going to say, like, I was going to ask you guys this. We covered this in our podcast a little bit, but I don't think we got a great answer. Do you find this movie to be fairy tale like or not? Because it technically isn't, right? It is a legal story. That's how we actually have the facsimile of the legal text right here. So it's a real thing that really happened. Yeah, here we go. Yeah,
I get
the original 1560, a photograph of the original 1560 French text. But it does have I think KJ on our podcast saw it as having like a little bit of that kind of fairy tale thing. And I was wondering what you guys thought of that.
Yeah, there's something kind of Rip Van Winkle about it. Just a wanderer stumbles into a town and everyone just feels like they know him and feels like he's their long lost, townsperson that they've been missing.
Yeah.
I think there is that element to it. I didn't really look at it through that lens. I definitely felt that, Tyler, you mentioned sort of there's that mystical scene with the smoke, kind of throne of blood scene where it felt like maybe there was something mystical there. But to me, maybe it's because just recently I had watched The Last Duel, which is also a dramatized court, true events that are being depicted. I could see this as a very bizarre true story, but I could see how it's similar to The Last Duel. I could see how it would have transpired in France. Juxtaposing those two, you could see how all these crazy things could come to pass in the bizarre court shenanigans that ensue afterwards.
And I see it more as like, not necessarily as a fairy tale, but like the retelling of the retelling of the retelling. Like this story's been passed on, and it turns into, there was so foggy that day, and there was mystical wisps of smoke in the fog, and crazy men in crazy costumes jumped out of the bushes and attacked him. You know what I mean? I could see it being like a story that gets sort of embellished as time goes along and sort of becomes mythical or like a fairy tale, just in the way that people want to make the story seem more interesting over time. You know what I mean? That's kind of the read I get from it. But it definitely does have a lot of those sort of, fairy tale elements to it. But I don't know if it's necessarily I don't know if that's necessarily my read on it. But
yeah, Fair enough. Yeah, because I'm not entirely sure, but I agree. I think there is this sort of like a element of embellishment, right? Yeah. That shows you the dance between fairy tale and reality.
I mean, because it even is. It's interesting because we have a narrator for this story. We just only hear from them at the beginning and the end. So it definitely reads to me as someone telling you a story from the way that they want you to hear it, or see it in our case. But
I think when you watch like movies of the Alamo or the Revolutionary War, I don't think we look at those as like fairy tale movies, even though they're embellished quite a bit. Based on true events. That Billy Bob Thornton Alamo movie comes to mind. But yeah, I looked at it more of a historical tale, not as much of a fairy tale, but definitely could see like the legend aspect of it. Certainly bizarre. I'd love to see. I love seeing like there's strangers on a train, and then there's the 1980s version, which is the cable guy. I would love to see this redone soon.
You'd love the cable guy version of the Return of Martin Guerre.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we don't advocate for remakes much on this podcast, but I really do. I mean, I'm gonna go watch some of these other tellings of this story. I liked it. I just like this idea quite a bit. And Matt, you said a word that you picked. You called it a legend. That's exactly what I was going for. And it's a great segue into the next round of this podcast because we're covering, we're doing legends next,
Legends.
Right?
Yep.
Oh, very good. What are you doing?
It's a very nice natural segue.
We are doing the movie Legend with Tom Cruise.
Makes sense.
We are doing, Tyler, what was your pick?
The Seventh Seal.
Very good.
Seventh Seal, and Ben's pick was Legend, and my pick was Excalibur.
Right.
John Boorman. Oh, yep. Very nice. Yeah. Oh God, I've read. I have and read all of I think the Thomas Mallory Legend collection of the King Arthur stuff. Absolutely love that stuff. Yeah, that's great.
Awesome.
No, I'm excited for it.
I'm excited.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Should be a good time.
Well, that is all we have on the Return of Martin Guerre. Thank you all for joining. Tom, thanks again for joining us. If you'd like to have another chance to plug your podcasts.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you for having me. This is an absolute blast. I love coming on the show. Yeah, it's all right. Yeah. Thank you. My show, so come when you guys are done listening to all the episodes of Three Films in a Pod, come down to Talking Pictures Trivia. And we have our own show. We've had a number of episodes with you guys on. I think, Matt, you were the last. You were last on for what were you on for again? It was Princess Mononoke.
That's right. Yep.
We had Princess Mononoke. Tyler, you were on for.
I was on for Clerks and Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Absolutely, yeah, because we had the crossover where I was on here for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So if you love these guys, come on down and listen to those episodes, or come and hear Limited Lexicon, our text-based adventure podcast, or Get the Point, our movie poster podcast.
Awesome. I will be checking those latter two out because I haven't seen those. But thank you everyone for joining, and we will catch you next time with some legends.
Wait, let me explain something to you. I am not Mr. Lebowski. You're Mr. Lebowski. I'm the dude. So that's what you call me, that or his dudeness or duder or, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.